Takeout is cool, but delivery gets pricey. So, like a phoenix from the ashes, indoor dining is back at Forged Eatery. I use the analogy because the food is fire. It's a new approach to farm to table. No overalls, just dope food. Try my favorites, like the mushroom stew with pine nuts and ricotta, the cornmeal fried happy oysters, and the seared duck breast. Also, ask about the chocolate chip cookie tins. Mini chocolate chip cookies with a dusting of sea salt. Simply delicious. Head on over to forgedeatery.com to check out the current menu options and make a reservation today. Forged is located at 3520 Chestnut Avenue in Hamden. Welcome to Getting to the Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. And my next guest is an acclaimed musician, educator, and podcaster. I'm learning as podcaster. Residing in Baltimore, we have Wendel Patrick. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I always do like the 30,000 foot view, and I do it purposely. I give a really high level overview of what the guest does and what their work's about, but I give them the opportunity to really express what their work is about. So if you will, could you talk about what your work and your background is?
Sure. Well, I do a number of different things for quote unquote work. Doesn't always feel like work, but sometimes it does. But I am a musician and a professor of music as well. Music producer, pianist, do stuff with turntables, beatboxing, vocals. Basically, I'm a sound connoisseur and advocate. I
was waiting for something like that to be said. I was waiting for it. Like, come on, do it.
Yeah. I love sound, but I'm also a photographer. I love photography, images. So yeah, I'm a man of many, what's the word? I don't want to say talents.
Interests?
Something other than interest too. Pursuits.
Okay. Yeah. It's good.
Many pursuits.
Yeah, like, one of the things I try to do is I try to do some research, and I was like, all right, this is going to be extensive. And so some of my questions are going to reflect that, obviously. And definitely, I was stalking your Instagram for a little bit. And I was like, this is a very busy dude. I was like, you're doing everything. And I'm just sitting there. I was like, all right, I'm nodding my head a lot. I was like, all right, so this is at least step one. So with your varied interests and your varied pursuits, let's call it that, use your term, speak on like how the creative process kind of differs or how it's maybe similar, because you're working with music and sound is important to you, and the visuals that you're working with are also important. In what ways are there like overlap between how you prep and how you get into that space to create? And obviously, what are the differences there?
Well, so I would say that generally speaking, I'm a fairly curious person in the sense that I think a lot of my artistic development has happened because I'll run into something that I want to try and see if I can do it, or see if I can get it to work, or see how it's going to sound. Photography and videography for me came. Well, initially, I should say I started taking photographs the first time I went on a musical tour to Europe. And I'd always been interested in photography, but could never justify the expense of a nice camera until I went on tour. And I thought, okay, well, let me buy the least. So I did my research. I got a camera that had the least amount of like bells and whistles, but also took good pictures. And that was really where I sort of got into photography. But even then, even just like saying it now, it was clearly linked to what I was doing musically, in the sense that I was performing musically. Yeah. And but I became a little bit obsessed with it and learned more and more, and started to figure out how I could use it to support what I'm doing musically. And then moved into video.
Yeah.
And so you said you were stalking my Instagram. So basically everything that you see and hear is, made by me. So I shoot all of the video content, edit all the video content, and it's a lot of fun. So there's definitely overlap. Yeah. And I approach it in a similar fashion in the sense that I'm like, I wonder if there's this thing that I can do or get this to look a certain way. So it's really all about that.
Is that I find like when I talk to people who kind of have that visionary view, it's like, hey, I may be a person that I'm in this particular discipline. Like I've talked to people who are, let's say, musicians who are rappers and so on, and they're like, no, I need to definitely be involved with the visuals, if not do the visuals, or I need to be responsible for what this layout is going to be, and just these different things to have what feels like is congruent with that person's vision, as opposed to someone else came in and kind of helped and sprinkled or maybe even did it. Is that something that you find that does it feel more satisfying to be involved in various facets of that presentation, whether it be musically and visually, or is it like, because you said it's kind of fun, you said it's interesting, but is it just a pursuit? Like, how do you view that?
Well, it's more, for one, you don't have to wait on anybody because you're doing all of it yourself,
Sure.
So if I get an idea at 9:30 p.m. and start working on it at 10 p.m., I can work all night in my own studio, recording something, making something. I don't have to call anyone. I don't have to wait on anyone. It's either going to look the way I want it to look, or it's not going to work because I'm just not able to do it just yet. But really, I think a lot of it initially stemmed from just not wanting to have to wait on other people. I mean, years ago for my first album, I wanted record scratches on this one track. And so I got in touch with a friend of mine in New York who's a DJ and asked if he would put some cuts on it. Yeah. I didn't have turntables. I wasn't scratching at the time. And he said he'd love to, but I just had to wait because he was busy. And so let me get some turntables and learn this. And and so once you learn how to do something, oftentimes, well, at least for me, like I don't want to just be able to do it functionally. It's a bit of a mental experiment to be able to get pretty good at it. I have this idea that I think most people, barring, physical or mental issues, can be good at almost anything if you spend the time. Being great or exceptional, that is a little different. Although I think often it's the same process, but you just have to do it for longer and be a little bit more discerning and disciplined. But you have to be disciplined to become good at something. But I do think if you spend time and you pay attention to what you're doing wrong and sort of constantly try to either fix it or improve on it, you will get good at just about anything. That's been my experience for most of the things that I've tried and put time and effort into.
I think that's one to grow on there, discipline and invest the time. And it is an investment or what have you. But if the goal is to pursue whatever it is you're pursuing, to get better at it, to get good, to get great, and potentially be a master in that space or what have you, you don't just do it. It's not just, oh yeah, suddenly I'm good. And that's the thing that kind of faults me. And I think other people, like obviously other people as well, where you just think, oh, instant gratification, I'm going to be great at this. And then it's like, no, you're probably going to suck for a while, and then you might become better.
Well, and even when you become really good, or great, sucking at something is a regular part of that process, right? But you just get so used to it, you don't think of it that way. So basically, if I'm learning how to play a new piece on the piano, it doesn't matter if I'm a great pianist. If I've never seen it before, you are bad at it, right? Now, because you've played for a long time, the amount of time that you're bad at it doesn't last for very long. Because you're not actually bad. you just can't play it yet, right? And so you have to go through the steps to be able to, get the muscle memory in, the chordal, melodic memory to be able to play it well. But that's just a part of the process. So you don't ever think about it as like, oh, I'm not good at this. Yeah. And, thankfully for me, I started playing at a very young age. I was 3 years old when I first started playing. And
wow.
So you get frustrated a lot as a kid, but you learn that that's a part of the process and you work through it. And so, that just, that's just a part of it all. But yes, being bad and at something constantly is what a lot of people don't realize is a part of being really good at things. And the other thing is, I never set out to become a producer or a photographer or a professor, honestly. I started producing, I didn't even call it that, but I just wanted to do something enjoyable when I wasn't practicing the piano. So I just bought a couple of little pieces of gear and would make my little beats and it was just the same thing. Like I just run into problems and solve them. And then over time, pretty quickly, I got pretty good at it, but I wasn't showing any of my music to anyone because that wasn't the intention. I had no intention of doing this professionally until I did show it to someone and they were like, what are you doing with this? This stuff sounds great. And I was like, nothing. What should I do? And they were like, oh, you got to send this places. But that wasn't the intention. I was never like, I'm going to be a music producer. I'm going to be a beat maker. None of that. It's just repetition over time yields improvement, and with enough improvement, and if it's something you like and love doing, and you're fortunate to be able to find ways to do it, then that's how that happened for me.
You're dropping jewels over there. I appreciate that. So as far as like playing the piano and growing in that space and working in hip hop and beat making, they're regarded in some circles as like there's overlap. You see people like they're able to make beats using keys and so on, I suppose. But like generally, like piano is like considered like in more of the classical space. So how is it like doing things that are looked at as being vastly different? How is it doing that, and what was more of the interest? Like you started off playing the piano at a very young age, or what have you, which is still blowing my mind a little bit, by the way. And then I see you just getting very loose on the pads. I was like, all right, this guy here. So speak on that a bit.
Well, I've loved hip hop since I was 6. And I was 6 when I first heard Rapper's Delight. Actually, when I was living in Venezuela at the time, and it was just like this craze, and people would rap it in Spanish. They called it La Cotorra down there. But it wasn't until a few years later, I was probably like maybe 11 or 12, when like hip hop started to sort of permeate a little bit more with like Jam On It by Nucleus, and then Grandmaster Flash, and Furious 5, and then Run DMC, and I really liked all of that, Dougie Fresh. But it was really when I want to say when Rakim first came out that I started to really listen seriously. Rakim and BDP with KRS-One, and it wasn't just sort of like fun music anymore. Like I was getting what I felt was eye-opening knowledge, and I was amazed because they weren't that old, much older than I was. But so I've always listened to, loved, and participated in however I could hip hop. But I didn't have any money for any gear. Like I had a drum machine in college, which I wore that thing out and mastered it, and I remember my roommate was like, are you going to sleep? But that was the only thing I could afford, and I ended up having to sell that at one point. It was an Alesis SR16 drum machine.
Oh.
And so, yeah, I always loved it, but it wasn't until I started really like making beats that I was participating in that way. Mm-hmm. But, all of these sort of boxes and, saying it seems like they're opposites. A lot of that is not real, Okay. Now, in terms of the culture and the origins, right? Like that stuff is that is very specific and important. But at the end of the day, all music, for the most part, is manipulation of rhythm, time, and frequency or pitch. And so along with that, because I've been so invested in the music and the culture, and that, is not foreign to me, it allows me to use all of my musical training and to then create within different genres, because I do hip hop, jazz, classical. I write choral pieces, but really it's more about familiarizing yourself with how rhythm, melody, harmony, and frequency are manipulated in a particular genre as opposed to another one.
Okay.
That's really the difference. And once you can wrap your mind around that and master that, what I discovered is that there's really no limit to what you can do and the way that you can, sort of merge things stylistically or completely blow one thing up and have it appear as something else. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way of explaining it, because, obviously, but it's also this thing where you'll listen to someone that does like an instrumental, or they have a certain style that they're doing something, and then you'll hear something that just feels like so next level. And it's like, how did they do that? I didn't think that you could use that instrument for that. And it's like, oh no, their discipline is in this other area. And then they turned it using the terminology you presented, the frequency, the pitch, all of that different stuff. And it's like, it's flipped it. And now we're trying to catch up,
Yeah.
So let's talk about records a little bit.
Okay.
What was the first record you owned, and how did you obtain it?
First record I owned. All right, so in my house there were a lot of records and a lot of reel-to-reel tapes.
Okay.
My dad is from Trinidad. My mother's Jamaican, and so there was a lot of calypso, reggae, but also, like a lot of James Brown, Donna Summers. Yeah. I was born in '73, so there's a lot of disco that was played. So there were always records and music in the house, and I could listen to whatever I wanted with supervision. Right? So up until a certain age, I had to tell my dad, and he would get what I wanted to listen to, and he would put it on and play it. Yeah. The first record that I remember sort of being mine was actually the Star Wars soundtrack.
Oh wow!
Which was like a 3-disc or 4-disc set, but I didn't buy it. My dad bought it for me. But I remember I would sit in the study and play the Star Wars soundtrack. Now I play other things too, but that was the first thing that was mine, Yeah. Now the first record that I bought with my own money, a 45, and I want to say it was Mr. Roboto.
You're taking some swings here. Huh? This is interesting.
I want to say it was Mr. Roboto.
Yeah, some sticks, right?
That was definitely something that I got early on with my own money. I was like 9 or 10. I don't know why it was that, but it was probably the Domo Arigato Mr. Roboto part. Like I remember thinking that was kind of cool. But shortly after that, I also remember buying Art of Noise.
Okay.
Beatbox was on the A side.
Yeah.
And what's that slow song?
Sound of Lovemaking?
Yep. It's not Sound of Love.
It's Moments of Love.
Moments, right, yeah. I was on the B-side. And I remember I never used to listen to that. I didn't like it at all.
Yeah.
For like the first month. And I was started to listen. I was like, this is pretty cool. The right? So I remember buying that, and Jam On It was one of the first records that I bought also, by Nucleus.
So I'll do this thing where I get trapped in decades on occasion. And I would just do like a search because like I was born in 85. So, but my partner was born in 73. So we have like those conversations. She's like, you never heard this? I was like, I don't tell you. And so I get introduced to a lot of different music, and I already have like a pretty broad palette, but she would throw on stuff that she would listen to. She's like, yeah, when the Depeche Mode album came out, I was like, I was not born, or something like that. But then I'll just dig it. I'm like, yo, I see this. I see this being captured by maybe a different artist in a different way, or they're aiming to capture that. So I always try to reach out to people when they have music as part of that background. It's like, what was that first record? What did you get initially, just to get a temperature on where they're at and what they were getting?
Yeah.
I mean,
but there was a lot of music that was being played, before I bought anything. But I think that was probably where my tastes and my parents' tastes probably started to deviate a little bit. Because my dad would never have bought a Styx record, or a Nucleus record. He wasn't really interested in that stuff. So if I wanted to hear that, I had to go get it or listen to the radio.
We had the dynamic where my dad would only listen to like super old rock and like jazz, and my mom would listen to like what's popping right now, like a little bit of a resurgence, Baltimore club music. So I was like in between the two, and I was one of those kids that when my dad would put on like Morgan State Radio, and they have like jazz and all of that stuff playing, I'm like, can we get back to the rap, please? Thanks. And now, being in my 30s, I only own like 4 records, but 3 of them are like jazz records or what have you. And I know it's super disappointing to hear like you own 3 records, like 3 vinyls. Everything is Spotify. But I have like 2 Charles Mingus records. That's my guy. I'm trying to model my life around his in some ways. And I have the soundtrack from Rocky IV. So
why 4?
That's my favorite movie of that series. Came out the same year I was born, and he proved to us that you can punch your way against the Russians and you can beat communism just by punching. We've learned that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's no easy way.
Well, I will say I have a few soundtracks. I mean, I just told you about the Star Wars one, which I got when I must have been 5.
Sure.
5 or so. But I have purchased soundtracks before on the strength of a movie, and like I've liked the soundtrack or loved the soundtrack, but I probably would never have bought the soundtrack if I hadn't seen the movie. Like for example, the soundtrack to "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" Yeah, that's a phenomenal soundtrack. Love most of the music, but it's because of the experience with the movie, Or Billy Elliot is another one.
See. What is it? Like I do a review podcast or what have you, and a movie review podcast. And we recently recorded New Jack City, and it was a lot of songs in that soundtrack I didn't know. And I remember it was one of those rare instances. Yeah, I remember I saw that in theaters, and being like 6, and it was probably wild inappropriate for me to watch this in theaters. But I was like, what is this guy song that I've never heard of? And I was like, they performed this in the movie. I watched this movie. And now it's just in my loop now on Spotify. It's like, New Jack is, yeah, go ahead, Aaron Hall, do your thing. But the other thing that kind of has that vibe for me, I see it. Like I see the scene more than like, if I just heard, just kind of what you were getting at, if I just heard this, would I've really sought out anymore? Would I look for the entire soundtrack? But then I go back to like, what scene was this? Oh, I remember that scene. It was fire. Right. And it would be the theme for RoboCop. Like it's just horns in it the entire time. And it's like, all right, this is cool. And it reminds me of watching that movie over and over again. It's one of my favorite movies. Grew up watching it. And that's the thing that pops out. So if I'm like, all right, I need to think, let me just put something on with no lyrics. And that's usually in my list of thinking music.
I can see that.
So, and I realize I've spelled podcaster wrong, which is hilarious. So you kind of touched on it earlier with your when you were in college with your roommate or what have you. And I had to ask the same question. When do you sleep? Musician, professor, photographer, podcaster. When do you sleep? I'm just looking at these hours. I'm like, my man is still going at it.
Yeah.
Well, how do you manage your time? Is probably the better question.
No, the first question is a good question.
Okay.
I don't really sleep that much, to be honest. I mean, I'm trying to be better about it just because it does affect your health. I mean, I get a fair amount of sleep, I'd say, and I'm trying to be better about, like, I mean, my studio is in my home, so it's very easy for me to just work all night. And then sometimes I have to because I have a deadline, and I've had to teach all day. Yeah. Also, I am a professor, which means that I do get summers off from teaching. And I also get, a winter break. So my schedule shifts, I guess, after that 5-month period. But it is tricky. A couple years ago, I was in Chicago half the week and then in Baltimore half the week. So splitting 3 and 4 days. And I was teaching at Peabody and Johns Hopkins. And then I'd have to fly out and land in Chicago and take the train and hustle to class to teach there. And, that was really exhausting. That's actually when I started drinking coffee. Never drank coffee until I was in my mid 40s, basically. Yeah. And but it helps to be doing something that I love doing. Mm-hmm. It makes it easier to keep long hours, and also there's it's interesting what it does to your adrenaline, like when you get really into something and you just, like sometimes I'll be exhausted, but I don't feel tired, and I'll finish something and I'll like it so much, I'll just listen to it on loop for an hour after I'm done instead of getting into bed, Yeah. But sometimes I'll get into bed and just take an easy day and sleep until, I'll get into bed at 6 a.m. when I'm done. I just sleep until noon and go for a walk, or sleep until 10 and go for a walk and take a nap a little later. It depends. Do I look sleepy?
No, you don't. It's one of those things where I have trouble sleeping, and I've found when I got over the last year and change, what have you, just doing the fitness thing, because you don't want to put on the quarantine, whatever. And especially with having that rigidity there and just having that structure, it's like, all right, I'm almost pre-programmed to get 6-7 hours sleep, but I'm getting up at 5 or 4:30 sometimes to get my stuff in, and to do the day of working as a data analyst, and then maybe doing 3 or 4 podcasts afterwards or what have you. And I definitely echo that sentiment where it's just I'm not tired. This is great. Or even having to do the research for a podcast, sometimes that can be a little bit much. It's when it's a little too much, I'm like, wow, I love this movie. I don't feel like watching it right now because I'm reviewing it and come up with the oral history for that other podcast that I do. And sometimes it's just a bit much. And it's really important to balance it out. And to your point about it being a health thing, I always look at it as, in addition to the health component, as how optimal am I? It's if I'm going to be tired, I'm going to be dragging. I'm not going to be as quick with either the questions or with the wit or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a disservice to the guests too. I feel I'm exhausted. I wasn't listening. Yeah. Sorry. So if my goal is to be on and to provide, good content and, be a professional, as it were, then getting rest is a thing. Get that nap in, get that 15 minutes or get a disco nap in or whatever and make it happen.
Right.
So now we get to the weirder part, and I have a few questions left. Now we get to one of my weirder questions.
Okay.
And it used to be, what's your favorite curse word? But I've removed that one from the list. It'll come back eventually.
I'm half Jamaican, so that would have been easy. But yeah, let's move.
Okay, that's great. That's points. We may have to talk off mic about a few Jamaican things, but so professionally, what's your most embarrassing moment?
Most embarrassing professional moment?
Yeah. I'm embarrassed weekly, so I'd rather share in somebody else's, like, oh, I'm mortified in what I did.
I honestly haven't had a lot because I tend to be pretty prepared.
Yeah. I was waiting for you to say never lost, no losses at all.
No, I'm sure there's at least one or two, but I honestly can't think of one right now.
That's all. It's all good. It's all good. Then let's flip it then.
Okay.
What would you say one of your proudest moments are then? Like we'll do the full switch. Like, you know, this was embarrassment. This may have been my trough right here. Now let's go to that peak. What was the peak?
So there've been a lot of peaks, but when I say that, I don't mean it as in like I've done a lot of amazing stuff. I don't mean it that way. What I mean is, you know, being an independent musician or artist or creator is can be pretty lonely, you know, in some ways. Like maybe I don't feel it that way per se, but I spend a lot of time alone creating, you know.
Sure.
And you can't really sometimes explain what you're working on or tell people. Or sometimes you don't want to because they'll say like they'll be like, oh, that's great. Have you considered doing it? And it's like, you know exactly what you want to do. Yeah. And you don't really want to have that conversation. But also just because in general, people don't really understand and what you're trying to do. And so I think probably one of my prouder accomplishments was putting out 3 albums on the same day and deciding
underachiever
and announcing yeah. Well, it's funny because it was actually supposed to be 4. And I wasn't happy with the 4th one. And I was sort of kicking myself at not doing the 4. And I remember a friend of mine was like, you know, you did 3 though. So, you know, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's true. And so once I put it in perspective, but you know, that wasn't the plan initially. It was I wanted to put out an album, and while I was working on ideas for that album, I had 2 other performance projects that ended up turning into ideas for other albums. Sure. And so then it became sort of this thing of like, I wonder if I can keep these 3 things mentally compartmentalized separately and bring them all to completion and fruition at the same time. So that became the exercise. Sure. And I did. And I remember, you know, finishing. So they all came out on New Year's Day of a particular year, and I finished the first one on like December 29th, and then the other 2 on the 31st. And I remember going for a walk and listening to them back to back to back, and coming back into the building as the last one was finishing, and walking into the elevator. And I started crying because I was just so happy that it had, you know, that I had done it, you know, and that I liked how they sounded. So when I say that there's lots of peaks, I mean lots of moments like those. And sometimes they're very public, and sometimes they happen when I'm by myself, you know, because that really, I feel like for me is what it's all about. And you know, like I said, it's lonely. You know, there's a lot of lows that you experience by yourself as well. And I don't mean, you know, like embarrassing performance moments or professional moments. I mean just where, again, you know, you're doubting what you're going to do, or it seems like it's harder than what you think or what you thought. And again, like you can't really talk to people about it, you know. Yeah. You just have to try to work through it, you know.
No, that's great, and thank you for sharing that. Actually, Because I think we look for those top shelf things of, hey, I got this accolade, I got this, I got that. And really it has to come from you. Like how did this feel for you? Why was this important to you? And, one, putting out that, and that wasn't even like putting out 3 distinct projects in the same day. And that really wasn't even your goal. It's like, damn it, I just quite missed it. But still just feeling like, but I did it though, but I did this and I love these. I mean, this is my work and I feel great about it. I feel that way whenever I'm able to do a live show, and then you have people who actually are looking forward to seeing you. Like, oh crap, this is great. And just the fact that I'm still doing it. Like I look at the math. I'm probably done like well over 700 podcasts in the 12 years I've been doing it. And it's just like, well, thank you. It still excites me and it still interests me. And that's right there, the thing that this is what I want to do. And it doesn't feel like work. It feels like just like a lot of fun. And it's always like a challenge. I can learn something new and kind of drive that. Like being able to identify a problem, like definitely resonated me with what you were saying earlier, because that's what I do day to day, but that's also my personality. Creatively, share 3 things that you need to help you set that mood. Like I need scotch, and probably something unhealthy like a bag of potato chips or something, and other items. What would you need to get in that mood, to get in the mind state that says, all right, you know what? I feel like I got some juices flowing. Let me put something together.
I honestly do not need anything, and it happens all the time. Like I'll just be in the grocery store and there's this music just kind of writing itself in my head. Like it's more a matter of like just when I sit down and it sort of pours out. Maybe, there's sometimes really where I have like a deadline or something like that where it's helpful to go for a walk, or to, maybe go to the gym, but it's not really to like get things going. It's just to, it's like it sort of gets pent up during that period, and then when I sit down, it just sort of floods out. But as far as, I really don't need anything.
I dig it.
It's just always on. That doesn't mean it's always great, but it's always on. Mm-hmm.
It's that thing about like you hear for like people that teach like writing classes. My partner's in a writing class and it's every Thursday, and it's one of those things like you got to have something every class. And like she's a writer, but she's like, I need to really get back into the practice and doing it regularly and so on, and being able to put out stuff. And it's like some of the stuff you're not going to like that you're going to do, and some of the stuff you're going to really like, and so on. But it's a matter of continually doing it, actively doing it, and and kind of if that's the thing that you do. And it's just like, yeah, I always have something. And literally on the weekends, like all of these bits and stuff that I'm running for my other show, it's like, I need to write this down. Where's my notepad? I need to write this down because it's never turning off. Mm-hmm. And it's literally like during the week, being alone, doing the solo thing for the most of the week, especially when I'm doing this stuff. You definitely are alone. I was like, all right, I'm going to save all of my good stuff for the weekend. And then my partner could hear everything. She can hear everything. And I think she silently hates me for it, but also it doesn't stop. So it's like, here's the soundboard. Enjoy. Here's everything. So these are the last 2 questions I got. Okay. What draws you to a particular genre?
In what sense?
Like, let's say, is it the sound? Is it the mood? Is it the part of the year? What have you? I know from a listening standpoint, whenever it's the fall, I'm listening to the saddest, darkest, most desperate, depressing music possible. And I was like, oh, give me all of it. This is great. So when you, from a production standpoint, is there a time like, all right, the sun's out, guys, let's make this kind of more of a Caribbean instrumental here, or more something that's more up tempo and upbeat? What draws you to a particular genre in that sense?
Yeah, well, it depends. If I'm writing and recording a score for a film or radio or a podcast, then it's the content that I'm scoring.
Sure.
That is what dictates. If it's something that I'm making, just For me, it really just depends on what kind of mood I'm in. I like switching things up. And, to be honest, most of what I make probably, or a lot of what I make, I should say, wouldn't really fit necessarily into one genre. I just make what I like. And, when I started putting music out initially back in 2007 and people started writing about it and writing about me, they would say, he's an instrumental hip-hop producer. And I was like, okay, that's cool. But I hadn't really given myself any sort of label or, or box. And so sometimes I'll just make some stuff that I just think sounds great or sounds good, but it'll be really quirky and maybe it'll straddle genres in some way, but then other times I'll make something that is very specifically, a particular style. But it varies, but I definitely like to switch up.
I dig that. I think that's what draws me to people who it's the way I'm going to describe it, and it's probably not right, but multi-instrumentalists. That's the way I kind of like look at it. It's like, oh, you're here and here, but also here, but you got a little bit of this there too. And that's what pulls me in, because it has a unique quality to it. And that's what I've heard with some of the stuff I've listened to from you, because, like I said, Instagram stalking. And, it's one of the things that just pulls me in. And I realize, like, there's like a list of multi-instrumentalists that I like. Tor Iwaf, what's the dude's name? The dude from Tame Impala, what have you. It's just like, oh, yeah, I like what you're doing here. And you can hear pop up in like hip hop samples. And it's like, oh, this is considered psychedelic, or this is like indie. Exactly. It's like, or this is just purely just electronic music. And that's a whole umbrella term in itself. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, I can just have this on a playlist and just let it go. Mm-hmm. So this is the last one I have. Okay. This used to be the crab cake question, and that was like people were like, I don't eat crab. I was like, yeah, you do. I saw you eating crab, because they don't want to be, political, because, crabs are political. What does it mean for you to be an artist with ties to Baltimore?
Well, I can definitely say, first of all, that I love it here. And my Baltimore experience is, I don't know that it's unique, but I didn't really move here. Like, I didn't come here with any intention. I had finished music school in Chicago, was going to be living in Chicago, and my mother had moved to Baltimore 2 years prior, and I came to visit her because I hadn't been home in a while. Yeah. And, I just finished what I knew would be the end of my schooling, so I just wanted to come home for a little bit. And while I was here, my living arrangements fell through because one of the people I was supposed to live with got a job somewhere else. So I was like, well, I'll just stay in Baltimore for a little while. And, meaning I didn't think I'd be here longer than 3 weeks to a month. Yeah. And that was 24 years ago. Wow. And, I started working and had some concerts, some recitals, and just life just sort of took over. And I remember when I put my first album out. And at that point, I'd been here 10 years, but I was very sort of isolated. I wasn't really a part of the music community here. Like, I was mostly at home practicing, just feverishly. And I'd say until about 2004 or 5 was when I first started to kind of come out a little bit as Wendel Patrick. Yeah. And I remember when my first album came out. At some point after the first album came out in 2007, maybe it was City Papers, somewhere in Baltimore, they wrote something about me, and they said, Baltimore's own Wendel Patrick. And I remember being like, wow, that's so cool. Like, that's amazing. What I've noticed over the years, which is one of the things that I love about the city, is that if you do good work here, or what people see as good work, they will claim you. Mm-hmm. Which is not necessarily what other cities will do, but they will proudly claim you. And I felt very supported in the arts community, not just the music community. And the hip hop scene, I think, is very cohesive. There's, different groups and different factions, but they mingle, intertwine, collaborate. And, we bring a lot of them together with Baltimore Boom Bap Society, which is another thing I love to do with DJ88. But I decided in 2012, that was the first time I really thought maybe I might move. Like, maybe I'll go to California or New York. But I made a concerted decision, a conscious decision that I was going to stay here. That's actually when I moved into this place, the studio, with it's my home with a recording studio in it. Yeah. And so over the years I've just become more and more entrenched, and now teaching at Peabody and being the new host of Artworks on Maryland Public Television. I definitely plan on staying here, and I love it here.
Yeah.
And I plan on being here for a long, long time.
That's great to hear. That's the end of my questions. So I like to give every guest an opportunity to shamelessly plug with your website, your social media, all of that stuff.
Yeah, well, my Instagram is where probably the most stuff is popping that I put up. And my Instagram IG handle is Wendel Patrick Official Music. The website where you can get music or download albums if you want, but also just check out other stuff, is wendelpatrick.com. Wendel with one L. If you have an Apple device, it will try to autocorrect to two L's. Do not let it. It's one L.
Well, this has been great. I'm sorry. Did you have anything else? I'm sorry.
You can just check out. You look up Wendel Patrick on Spotify or any streaming service and listen to some good music.
Absolutely.
And check out the Out of the Blocks podcast as well. You can hear my music on there and some really amazing stories about Baltimore City and beyond.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally. So for Wendel Patrick, I am Rob Lee saying that there's art in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for it.